This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax. For a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
Your data is like gold to hackers. They'll sell it to the highest bidder. Are you protected? McAfee helps shield you, blocking suspicious texts, malicious emails, and fraudulent websites. McAfee Secure VPN lets you browse safely, and its AI-powered text scam detector spots threats instantly. You'll also get up to $2 million of award-winning antivirus and identity theft protection, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 522, Operation Winter Storm. Last time, the Russians had sprung their trap, and though not perfect, all criteria was met. Now, from Hitler on down, orders were being issued, men and equipment was being readied. But Stalingrad was a long ways away. General Manstein, in charge of the new Army Group Dawn, had to work with what was nearby. It wasn't enough. As for General Paulus and the trapped 6th Army, they needed vast amounts of supplies each day just to survive, much less be strong enough to fight their way out. That Luftwaffe Chief Goering lied about what could be delivered by air may have pleased Der Fuhrer, but almost everyone else knew he was full of it. This was the basis of rescuing the 6th Army. With the discussion of supplies being over, though far from settled, it was now down to the million-dollar question. What should Paulus and Manstein do specifically? A breakout was the best course, but there were still the details. And discussed were 2 versions of a breakout attempt. First, the 6th Army could start fighting its way out today to head to the southwest, while Manstein took what he had, which was the rest of Army Group B, and engaged the Russians, tying them down. This had several advantages. The 6th Army was as fresh as they would be, though not really fresh at all. The Russians, who had encircled the 6th Army, had to be tired, but mostly they had not had time yet to build defensive works. Then there was the disadvantages. The biggest problem was that the best fighters that Paulus had was in the northern section of Stalingrad, i.e. furthest away from the Russian units that needed to be engaged to escape. The next problem was that Manstein had just arrived. The men were not organized or rested and themselves had just survived the enclosing arms of Operation Uranus. So they would not do as well as they could if fully rested. The question was, of course, would it be enough? The alternative to this was to wait 10 days and then begin to fight to break out. This would allow Paulus to shift his best forces to the southern end of the city to be the first to engage the Russians. Next, by then, Manstein would have received his 3 reinforcing divisions, 2 infantry and 1 armored. Of course, by the end of those 10 days, the Russians would be rested and reinforced themselves and have begun building defensive works. Yet this still seemed to be the best option. So everyone got to work while watching the calendar count down. Meanwhile, there was about to be another battle, but this one would be between allies. When the Axis attack to save 6th Army was to have gotten underway 10 days hence, that day Hitler met with Romanian leader Antonescu. And just as the Romanians were blindsided by the Soviets, the Romanian leader was about to be given the same treatment by the German leader. The talks began with Antonescu bringing Hitler up to date on how many of his men had actually survived the Soviet assault and where they were. This was important information, so the Germans could incorporate it into their attack plans. But just a few words into his report, Hitler cut him off, accusingly, saying everything that they were suffering now was because of the Romanian Fourth Army, that it could not stand up to the enemy. They did not belong on a battlefield. To which Antonescu replied, "Well, if your men had listened to the warnings of General Dumitrescu, we might not be in this mess." Soon, like artillery of battle, both sides were shouting accusations and insults at each other. After a few minutes of this, Antonescu stormed out of Hitler's office, got on his train, and went back to Bucharest. However, as more information reached him from the front concerning how many men his country had truly lost, the man had a nervous breakdown. But as bad as things were for the Axis troops in southern Russia, they were actually worse. It's not clear who said it first or when, but Manstein, a brilliant strategist, must have recognized that even if the retreat was possible, it would lead to Rostov, southwest of Stalingrad. Hence, that would be the new front. And if you looked at it from a wider point of view, if that was the new front, then Army Group A to the south would be trapped, or something very much close to that. The only way it was possible to save Kleist's force was for the Sixth Army to hold out inside Stalingrad for at least 2 weeks, to give Army Group A chance to pull back or retreat. If that could happen, maybe Army Group A and Manstein's forces could work together to free Paulus or finish taking Stalingrad. Either way, all this meant Sixth Army had to stay put for the foreseeable future, which happened to align with Hitler's view, which was probably based more on pride than strategic thinking. Proving this, Hitler declared Stalingrad was now Fortress Stalingrad. It would be held. Regardless of what the Axis were doing with either Army Group A or Army Group B, the Soviets had their own plans, which involved a delicate balancing act. General Chuikov, like the Germans, was still playing catch-up with whatever was going on, but then he was told, do not attack the enemy troops within Stalingrad, nor was he given additional help. What Zhukov and Yeremenko were attempting to do was to give Paulus hope, just enough so he would not want to fight his way out. And if they had reinforced Chuikov and told him to attack, this might drive them to do just that. No, the Sixth Army needed to wait to think that they and their masters had time to figure something out. Meanwhile, the Soviets would keep strengthening their troops to the southwest of Stalingrad, while at the same time pushing back those not caught in the net just a little more. Thus, the Soviet offensive did not actually wind down until November 30th.
I'm William Googe, a viewer, collaborator, and professional ultra runner from the UK. I love to tackle endurance runs around the world, including a 55-day, 3,064-mile run across the US. So I know a thing or two about performance wear. When it comes to relaxing, I look for something ultra versatile and comfy. The Ponto Performance Jogger from Vuori is perfect for all of those things. It's the comfiest jogger I've ever worn. And the DreamKnit fabric is why I'll always reach for them over other joggers. Check them out in the DreamKnit collection by going to vuori.com/William. That's VUORI.com/William, where new customers can receive 20% off their first order, plus enjoy free shipping in the US on orders over $75 and free returns. Exclusions apply. Visit the website for full terms and conditions.
As for the wider world, but certainly including Germany, Hitler ordered a news blackout. The German people were to be told the Soviet counterattack had been stopped, which was technically true. What was left out was that they had stopped themselves. It's interesting to note that Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, was unhappy with this decision. He knew it was best to put out information that was at least believable, but considering the Soviet tidal wave they had just been hit with and that the Sixth Army was still trapped, how to spin this one was beyond his imagination. So he hunkered down to think of something. Time to get creative. While Goebbels got creative, Manstein got busy. He needed a strong enough force to reach the Sixth Army, which would need to fight towards him. And lastly, the Soviet forces in the area needed to be destroyed. As for using Army Group A, that was currently above Manstein's pay grade. Thank all the gods for that. One problem at a time. While Manstein pleaded with Hitler to pull from other fronts to send to him, the survivors of the 48th Panzer Corps, who had been just behind the Romanians, started arriving at Army Group Dawn's headquarters. Thus, it and its staff would be the center of this new force Manstein was putting together. On its way to Manstein from Army Group A was the 11th Panzer Division, led by General Bauch, one of the best technical panzer commanders in the German army, and he would have to prove that just to get to Manstein. Given all the fuel it could carry, the 11th Panzer headed north. On December 7th, when just north of Rostov, it was met by the Soviet 5th Guards tank army. Now, the 5th Guards had pierced Manstein's line and traveled some 20 miles or 32 kilometers to the southwest just to get here, which shows something of Manstein's men's fighting capability. But now, these two army forces faced each other. The Soviet tanks went into defensive positions. Seeing that he had been given the initiative by this, Bauch put his anti-tank guns closest to the Soviets, but that night he had his panzers swing wide west to get in behind the Soviet tanks. The next morning, the Soviet tanks came on, expecting to take on the enemy's panzers. When they faced anti-tank guns instead, they started repositioning themselves to take on this particular threat, which is when the panzers behind them opened up. Between the German anti-tank guns and the panzers, the 5th Guards tank army was slaughtered. Bauch showed up at the headquarters, demonstrating what needed to happen to the enemy. Also coming to Manstein was the 6th Panzer Division from France, led by General Franz Landgraf. It had been on the Eastern Front before, but now it was back up to full strength. It was rested and had the latest weapons that the Third Reich had. Also en route was the 62nd and 294th Infantry Divisions, and there would be others. An Alpine division was soon added, as was enough Luftwaffe ground forces to equal a division. The 57th Panzer Corps, detached from Army Group A, was en route, but it was currently having issues with the mud. As his army was growing, Manstein got busy looking at maps, making plans. First, he divided his force into two armies. On his left, so the west, would be Army Detachment Hollet, named after General Karl Adolf Hollet. To his right would be the 4th Panzer Army under General Hoth. Now, technically, Hollet on the left or west was closer to Stalingrad, 25 miles or 40 kilometers away, than Hoth was to the right or to the south. This is, of course, relative to the city, but Manstein's left flank would not be the main attack. One, it was too obvious, and two, further left of Hollet was the relatively weak flank of the Hungarian Second Army. The Soviet forces were seen building up there. Perhaps the enemy was about to do to the Hungarians as they had done to the Romanians. Either way, all this meant that Hollet had to stay in place to keep an eye on that part of the line. Instead, Hollet would be told to attack, but to not go too far, just to keep the enemy units there tied down. Hopefully, Soviet eyes would stay focused there. No, it would be Hoth and his advancing to Stalingrad, cutting a path that the 6th Army could escape through. Now, Hoth's right flank was weak as well, but scouts told Manstein that the enemy did not have a strong presence there, so it should be safe. As for Paulus and his forces, Manstein didn't want to send him a message about the breakout should the enemy get wind of it. And Manstein needed Paulus's army as it was, the largest part of Army Group Dawn. Within the Soviet trap were 13 German infantry divisions, 3 panzer divisions, 3 panzer grenadier divisions, 1 anti-aircraft division, 2 Romanian divisions, a Croat regiment, and vital engineering units, along with the staffs of all of these. In all, about 245,000 men. But one of the biggest weaknesses facing the Axis, no matter what side of the encirclement they were on, was a lack of communications. To fix this, all messages went through the OKH, but that also meant Hitler got to see them. And from desperation more than anything else, he would not only change the messages, but he would send messages to Paulus that Manstein was not aware of. As for General Paulus, he knew that if he tried to break out, his infantry would suffer disproportionately. Certainly the rear guard. But if they could wait it out until spring, there would not be the dreaded winter battle that clearly the Soviets were better at. But staying put until spring, besides more men potentially staying alive, would come down to the Luftwaffe. But all of this, everything, to Manstein, was semantics. The Russians were hitting Holland harder each day on the left, so they were clearly thinking this is where the main attack would come from, so they wanted to disrupt it. As for Paulus, Manstein could not get a clear answer from the man, so he quit asking questions. He ordered that Operation Winter Storm, the rescue of the 6th Army, would begin on December 12th.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
That morning of the 12th, German artillery let fly. Then, Hoth's panzers on the German right set off. Paulus was told to be ready to move out in 48 hours. Behind Hoth's panzers, setting a good pace, were trucks and tractors pulling supplies for the 6th Army. If all went well, those vehicles would return full of wounded troops. Every man who could recover was needed if Army Group South was to recover. Manstein got the surprise he wanted. While Holland was being harassed on the left, and the Russians thought they were doing something preventative, on the right, in Hoth's path, was only the Soviet 51st Army, and just recently, much of its heavy weapons, certainly its anti-tank guns, had been taken away to give to Chuikov. And because of that, Hoth made 48 kilometers, or 30 miles, that first day, and he kept going. But of course, the Soviets reacted to this German right flank attack. Men and guns were brought up, which is why Hoth, though he was still advancing, was covering less ground each day. Still, by December 17th, he had reached the Akazi River. What Hoth needed now was more bridges, as only 2 were still intact in the area. Fortunately, the 17th Panzer Division arrived, and together they kept the enemy away, while pontoon bridges were being built. Just before the sun set, the panzers were across the river and back on the move. All Paulus had to do was match this success, and this just might work, despite so much, as in tens of thousands of enemy troops. But there was just one problem. The 6th Army was not on the move. It wasn't even trying to break out. The day after Hoth crossed the Akazi River, Manstein, furious, sent his chief intelligence officer, Major Hans Eismann, to Stalingrad by air. It would be his job to get the 6th Army moving. In attendance to discuss Operation Winter Storm and Operation Thunderclap, the latter the breakout of the 6th Army, was Manstein's man, Eismann, General Paulus, General Schmidt, the 6th Army Chief of Staff, and other staff officers. First, Eismann brought Paulus up to speed on Hoth's advance. Yes, he had a ways to go, but it was a good start. Then they got to Thunderclap. Eismann said that Manstein wanted it started now. Paulus agreed that the 6th Army should move out, But was now the best time? He asked his department heads for their opinion. The last to speak was Schmidt, the chief of staff of 6th Army. Supposedly, but we will never really know, all of the other officers thus far had said, yes, we should move out. Yes, we should move out now. But Schmidt replied, it was impossible for us to start moving out within 48 hours. Then he banged his fist on the table and said something to the effect of, the 6th Army can hold out until Easter if it has to. All you lot have to do is keep us supplied. Paulus nodded at this and turned to Eisman. He more calmly said, the 6th Army will not move. Just as Eisman, having flown out, was reporting this disaster of a meeting to Manstein on December 19th, Hoth's panzers were along the Mishkova River, about 30 miles or 48 kilometers from Stalingrad's southwestern edge. But Hoth was not confident in his chances of crossing the river, pushing the enemy out of the way, and holding them apart to allow the 6th Army passage. What he did not know was that the Soviet 2nd Guards Army had practically marched in their sleep to get into place on their side of the river to help deny the Germans entry. Of course, Hoth added, if the 6th Army attacked them in the rear while I was assaulting them in the front, this just might work. It was now or never. Manstein sent a top priority message to Zeitzler at the OKH, saying in part, this is the last possible moment for a breakout as a means of preserving the bulk of the troops of the 6th Army. He got no reply. At 6 p.m. that December 19th, Manstein learned that his connection to Paulus was currently working. It had been intermittent at best. So he gave Paulus a direct order. 6th Army attack will begin at once. His message was acknowledged as being received, but there was no reply. The radio from the OKH, i.e. Hitler, and Paulus's radio stayed quiet until the next morning, December 20th. It was Paulus. He said, well, we can't move out now. We don't have enough fuel. Not that it mattered any longer, for the situation had changed for the Germans, for the Eastern Front, for the war, for the world. A few days prior, on December 16th, the Soviets launched an attack across the Don to the west of Stalingrad against the Italian 8th Army. And truth be told, the Italians did well at first. But as the Russians did not let up, the Italians ran out of ammunition. With that being the case, they retreated. The attack against the Hungarians had been a red herring. Moscow was getting good at this. Army Group B, under Weeks, was trying to hold this attack back, but it was soon apparent to the Germans that the enemy had not done as when they were hitting the Romanians using blitzkrieg tactics, but rather returned to their old ways, hitting along a broad front, but with little depth, which, as the Germans were about to see, comes with its own advantages. The Soviets had torn a hole 30 miles or 48 kilometers wide in the line. The 27th Panzer Division rushed to counterattack, but within 48 hours, it was destroyed as a unit. There wasn't time to ask how this happened, but when Weeks asked Manstein for his reserves to help, the man told him, I don't have any. They're all supporting Hoth. So Weeks sent out the very effective General Balk and his 11th Panzer Division, and true to form, the man stopped the enemy in front of him. But it was the equivalent of holding up one's hand to a wave in the ocean. Water, or in this case troops, went by on either side. Which is why when Paulus said he had no fuel, Manstein knew it was all over. The opportunity had been created, painfully so, but it had not been exploited. For whatever reason. Only Paulus and the gods knew, and perhaps Hitler, but no one was brave or foolish enough to ask the gods, or Hitler. Manstein, seeing the inevitable, ordered Hoth to pull back. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So, as we're seeing again, the Soviets are getting very good at look at my left hand, and then they punch you with the right. So they're getting really good at that, and they've got the men to do it. And Crimea made it possible. It bought them time. So again, it started out rough for them, but they're able to organize themselves, and now it's really paying dividends. But of course, you can't forget the millions of Soviet men and civilians that are being lost in this tidal wave of destruction. But the point is, they're learning, they're organizing, and they're starting to turn it around. This is my own personal opinion. I couldn't find this anywhere, but I can't help but think there was a communication between Hitler and Paulus, something along the lines of just think about how awesome it would be if you could hold out until spring. We could get you help. We could eventually take Stalingrad and you'd be the hero. I don't know, some kind of ultimate sales pitch. But for whatever reason, Paulus was going to stay. He never had any intention of leaving, whether it was his own idea or it was Hitler's. And if you know anything about the military, or if you know anything about the corporate world, the number one person, when they need to do or say something unpopular, they have the number two person do it, and then they agree with him like, oh, that's a good idea. So, I mean, this is charades at this point. But the point is, they didn't even try to break out. Would they have made it? I have no idea, but it was their best chance, and now their best chance is gone. So Manstein's got to worry about this latest threat. So, and of course, then there's their Army Group A, and as we mentioned in this episode, Hitler's pulling elements from them, so they're getting weaker and weaker all the time. And you've just got to know the Soviets are building up something to oppose them, or at least to hold them back. So the whole thing is starting to unravel, and it's happening so fast, and it's happening in multiple areas at the same time. I think it's just more than the Germans can do. So anyways, that's my unofficial synopsis of this episode. So let's get back to business. Okay, so the latest member is Bruce Robertson. Thank you very much, Bruce. Well, the way it works is, and this will probably change in the future, but the way it works for now is when you sign up for membership, either through Stripe or you through PayPal, whatever, on the website, I have to manually sign you up and send you the password. Well, I was in the yard all weekend, so it was a couple hours, and Bruce wrote to me, and I said, look, yeah, I'm going to get you the password, but I'm currently in a who has the prettier yard contest with my neighbor. The thing is, they're retired, and she was a professional lawnscaping artist. I don't know. I'm doing the best I can with what I got, which is the secret to life, by the way, in case you were wondering. So I missed him for a couple hours, so sorry about that, Bruce, but I think he's in now, and he's got 270 something episodes to look forward to. So anyways, thank you, Bruce. As far as donations, there's Glenn Watson. Thank you very much, Glenn. Kevin Bradley. I'm very sorry that you're almost caught up. I'm doing 2 episodes a week. I don't know what more I can do except for take methamphetamines and make it 4 episodes a week. I'll talk to the wife about that for you. That's what I'm willing to do for you, Kevin. Then again, I can't remember, Kevin, if you're also a member, but there's also membership episodes. I don't know what to tell you. And this last one, let's see, the latest person who donated, Megan, is it Matkra? I probably butchered that, Megan. I'm very sorry. But anyway, thank you very much for the donations, and thank you, everybody, for listening. We will get to this. So as we can see, Army Group South, in its own way, is starting to crack. And it's like dominoes, right? So we'll see what happens. But it's how it cracks. It's how it falls apart. It's how it loses the initiative that matters. That's the part that I find most interesting. So we're going to cover the detail, but not too much detail, if you know what I mean, kind of maintain a balance. So anyways, for all of that, I hope you all have a great week. We'll get out the next episode soon. And as always, take care, everyone.
As a longtime foreign correspondent, I've worked in lots of places, but nowhere as important to the world as China. I'm Jane Perlez, former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. On Face Off, the US versus China, we'll explore what's critical to this important global relationship. Trump and Xi Jinping, AI, TikTok, and even Hollywood. New episodes of Face Off are available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to True Spies. the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly, out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.